Dr. Noah Bressman, assistant professor of physiology at Salisbury University in the Department of Biology. So I got into invasive species in a little weird way, in that as an undergraduate, I was researching at Cornell University in amphibious fishes, or I happened to find, long story short, I found a fish in a hallway and started asking how it got there. And I figured out how it got there, and it was a cool story. And that was a mummy chug. And then I did a couple more projects on amphibious fishes. I started a PhD at Wake Forest University on amphibious fishes. And then I started going into invasive amphibious fishes like the northern snakehead, walking catfish, plecos in Florida. And so then I got into invasive amphibious fishes, studying how they could spread from one body of water over another body of water. Whereas the snakehead comes from Asia, it is we don't have anything like it here. It can breathe air and move over land in short distances, and that's that's very different, and it's toothy. That's very different and scary for people here. And so when the first snakeheads were first found, there were several horror movies of snakeheads coming onto land, eating puppies and babies. And I did some research showing it how, yeah, they can move around on land. Like that wasn't there, nobody ever actually determined if they could. It was just all anecdotal. I figured out they can. But so science shows like they are a non-native species. They are invasive by the kind of management definition, where they're not native to here and they're causing harm to the ecosystem because they have to eat things. So they're eating native species like white perch and mummy chugs and migratory river herring, things that we care about. And so they are having impact on them. And there's some studies showing that they can shift the ecosystems around a bit, and have negative impacts on some of the populations of like things like largemouth bass that they compete with. They don't seem to be causing the extinction of anything species yet, but they've only been here for 20 years, so we haven't seen the full effect they've had. Like they were first found 20 years ago in one pond, and they've been slowly spreading since. And then people kind of move them around intentionally, like, oh, I want to catch it over here, closer to my home because they fight hard and they taste good. And I want to catch it, and so they do that. And so they're invasive in the biological sense, or they are causing harm. Now the snakeheads, again, like they are having negative impacts on the ecosystem, but they aren't the apocalyptic fish people feared they were going to be. Like they're not immediately causing extinction of everything around there. Non-native has a strict biological definition. It's not from around here. Uh, it's not native to this area. Invasive fish are all non-native fish that have been introduced and are deemed to cause or perceived to cause harm, negative ecological uh, or economical impacts, things like that, that can that are where there's a lot more cons than pros. However, some things like largemouth bass and bluegill sunfish are not and rainbow trout, brown trout are not native to Maryland. However, they have been stocked here for over 100 years, and they probably changed the ecosystem when they got here, but things since then have balanced out. We don't know if they caused extinction of some things like that. Like we're not the fish community isn't the same after them, but it's more or less now. It was stable after their introductions, after give it 100 years, 200 years, decades, and we have the new ecosystem because of that. And the science there isn't. We just don't have enough information yet to say snakeheads are going to have more good than bad in Maryland, just because they haven't been here long enough. And I think we need to give it more time with more research, limiting the spread of them, because they may still spread to new bodies of water where things may be different species where they can have those really bad effects there, the worse than we're seeing here, maybe causing extinction of like, let's say there's one species that is a really small range and very specific habitat and overlaps with snakeheads. Those could be eaten by the snakeheads, and in a larger number that could be problematic for the population. So that term invasive, and saying more invasive than others, you have to factor in what do people want out of this ecosystem. That's what makes it the term invasive, kind of the sociological aspect, where some people consider largemouth bass invasive, others it's non-native, just depending on where you are and whose perspective you're looking at. But a lot of people say, and so by that definition, snakehead could do that too. But still, the population has not balanced out like it has with bass introduced hundreds of years ago, and trout, and those did have negative impacts that we are that are seen with a decrease in native diversity in some of these areas. And so, do we want to decrease in native diversity with the increase in snakehead population for more people to catch and eat and have fun catching? And there's like fishing lure companies that devote lures to making snakeheads that boost the economy. And so there's a lot of factors to look into. My view is maybe the snakeheads will end up going the way of largemouth bass, Maybe we'll find over time as they get more established, they'll be more like the blue catfish that are unequivocally very harmful for the ecosystem. But for now, we should reduce the population of snakeheads until we have that data, because it's a lot easier to let the population grow and just keep reproducing, because that's what they're just doing right now anyway. We're not having a dent in their populations really. Uh, and then and while we research to see if they how harmful they could be, and if they end up not being harmful, let them reproduce more, rather than let their populations explode, spread them in everybody in the U.S., and then later on realize, oh wait, they were actually bad in some of these scenarios. The damage has been done down now. They use what's known as a terrestrial locomotion form known as axial appendage-based terrestrial locomotion, where axial refers to their mid body, so they're using their body to move in coordination with their appendages, their pectoral fins, and they'll kind of do like an army crawl pattern, propping themselves up on their fins and alternatingly rotating and planting their fins around, kind of like an army crawl. And so I recorded from the muscles and figured out they're very stereotyped muscle activity pattern. So it is not just moving randomly. They are doing a coordinated muscular effort that is different than swimming, which we recorded swimming behaviors. It is they're not just trying to swim on land. They are doing an active, different behavior to move around on land. They don't seem to move in long bursts, so they'll do it like they may cover several feet at a time and then take a break and then maybe several more feet. And so they're not likely to go miles and miles, but be able to move, give it a whole day. They can breathe the air out for over. They have air breathing organs, so they can breathe out of water for up to a day, especially maybe longer if they're kept moist and in the shade, preventing them from drying out. And so, give it enough time, they can move maybe several hundred feet over land, if the conditions are right, and that can get them to a new creek or river, things like that. And that makes them different to manage and more difficult than your typical fully aquatic invasive species, where they can only spread between waters that are connected, where these can then hop over land into the next watershed, spread through the water of that watershed, eventually hop over land to the next one, and keep spreading like that potentially. The snakeheads are in the family Chanidae, which is about 50 species. One genus is in Africa pretty much, and another genus, which may have now maybe two genuses, but there's an African group of snakeheads, and then there's a Southeast Asian group of Southern and Eastern Asian and a Southeastern paper. The northern snakehead, Channa argus, is a native to Eastern Asia, particularly from like the Korean Peninsula down into China, where it's got a similar habitat to the U.S. They can actually survive very cold conditions and very hot conditions, so they're very tolerant. And their name Chesapeake Channa is actually their name Channa argus is actually why a new bill was recently passed in Maryland to allow snakeheads to be called Chesapeake Channa, Channa being part of their scientific name. So that fishermen can market their fish as something other than snakehead, so that people see on the menu like, ew, snakehead, gross. Snakeheads are ambush predators that like to be in really shallow water, so they're often like hugging the shoreline right against structure, like grass, lily pads, and right against the shoreline. And they'll be in extremely shallow water, feeding on everything that comes by. They're like frogs, so they're eating native frogs. They are eating like a lot of small like killifishes that like to live in those habitats where really shallow water right against the shore. And so they're having impacts a lot on shoreline species, not as much deeper water species. But we have seen, based on in our catfish study, we happened to get a few snakeheads, where we're doing a diet study on them. We cut open some of their stomachs, and we saw these river herring, which are threatened river herring, which are a recovering species of conservation concern in Maryland. They were spawning in shallow waters in the Nanticoke River, and while we're electrofishing, we happened to catch some snakeheads in that shallow water where those fish were spawning. And we cut the stomachs open, and in like let's say a 25-inch snakehead, we found a 12-inch threatened river herring in its stomach. And so it sounds like they are eating some of these threatened species of concern. How much they're eating, we don't quite know. But there was a study that recently came out comparing the populations of fish in Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge and the little Blackwater River in Maryland before and after snakehead introduction. And it seemed to be there was less diversity after the introduction than before, where they may be eating or competing with some of these species that are no longer found there as much. Like there's nobody seeing pickerel in there anymore, and the killifish populations are being reduced in there. And so it seems like snakeheads are having impacts on those. Yeah. there are some changes to the hydrology of those areas that could be influencing the species as well, and blue catfish could be coming in there a little bit as well. And so there's some compounding variables, but it does seem like the snakeheads are linked to that, at least to some extent. But they can have influences on like frogs and lizards and small birds around the shoreline. I don't think they're going to cause the extinction of things that are amphibious, because amphibious stuff can get away. But it could very well reduce some populations, especially like things like frogs that like to get into areas with less fish, so their tadpoles can get eaten. If a snake gets overland into one of those areas that don't have much fish, they could reduce the population of the frogs in that area, like in those vernal pools that frogs love. They're more of a larger predator. When they're small, they'll eat like small like plankton when they're really small, and then they'll eat like bugs and stuff like that and get bigger. But basically, just they have to swallow their prey whole, so anything that can fit in their mouth, they may try to eat, as long as it gets in the habitat they're going to be. Uh, they could be potentially eaten by a snakehead. So I've seen people seeing crabs and some stomachs of snakeheads that are a little bit downriver, and showing that like they could potentially eat the crabs. I don't think they're having as much of an impact on the crabs as blue catfish are. So a couple of projects my lab currently has going on in snakeheads is one's on their mucus and comparing it. The coating their skin, basically their fish slime, and comparing it to other fishes like non-amphibious fishes like catfish and like catfish and carp. And it seems like the snakehead mucus is more slippery than non-amphibious fish mucus, so they seem to have an adaptation to help them basically help lubricate them moving around on land and move around on land more easily. And another project I have is going on with them is where we're trying to see if they can smell air, because fish are not thought to be able to smell air. These are amphibious. We're trying to learn about the evolution of sensory systems. So looking at modern amphibious fishes is a great way to learn about amphibious fishes 375 million years ago, to learn about their behaviors and senses. And so we're currently working on trying to see if they can smell. And we've got some mixed results on that. We're still trying to make sense of it, but we've got some interesting things going along in those areas.